This video provides an introduction to the Freeway Facility module. This information, as well as many additional details, can be found in the user guide at swashware, swashware.com under the HCM-CALC section. So I'm going to select the Freeway Facility module here and press the load button. So in this video, we're just going to give an overview of some of the basic features, and there are some additional videos available to cover some of the additional features, such as the quick data entry and creating an input file to run in the SwashSim microscopic traffic simulation program. So we're just going to cover some of the basics here with the data entry, and then go over some of the output screens as well. So the segments are going to be entered by row into the software program, and the different properties, characteristics of each segment will be shown in each of the columns. I'm going to go ahead and add a new segment. The program starts off with one segment, in this case a basic segment. We can press this button here to add a new segment, and we can use this down arrow here to change the segment type if we would like. I'm going to go ahead and change that to an on-ramp, and then we need to tab out of that field to set that selection. I'll go ahead and add another segment. I'll leave that as a basic segment. Add another segment, change this one to an off-ramp, and add another segment, a basic segment. Add one more segment here that I'll set to a weaving segment. And for now, I'll just add this one final basic segment. And to edit some of the segment properties, we can click on the highlighted edit button here. And so this will bring up a separate screen with some additional values that we can edit for the basic segment, and I'll come back to this in a minute. The length we can enter directly here if we would like. And we can also change the terrain type here. We have options for level, rolling, or a specific grade. If you choose the specific grade, then this field, the grade in percent, will become active, and you can change that value accordingly. With the Freeway Facility module, you can do multiple time periods. The default time period is 15 minutes, so if you want to do an hour analysis, you can add 4 time periods. For this initial demonstration, I'm just going to add one additional time period, and we can do that with the button up here, and that'll change it to the second time period. So you may have noticed that these edit segment buttons that were previously yellow are no longer yellow. That's because you cannot access those edit screens unless you have time period 1 selected. So if you have time period 1 selected, you can access it. If you have any other time period selected, these buttons will not function. You can use this button to just show certain kind of segment types, just your basic segments, for example, or on-ramps, off-ramps, weaving, and so forth. So I'll go back to these segment edit screens and discuss a little bit more of the details with that. So I got to put it back to time period 1, and I'll select the first basic segment. So in here we can change the number of lanes, and you'll notice I have 2 rows. The first time that I entered this screen, I only had 1 row. Since I added a second time period, I've got 2 rows, so it'll reflect however many time periods you have entered with the appropriate number of rows. This button will allow you to set the free flow speed. So you can either enter a measured value directly, or you can use the estimation procedure for the basic segment. You can set a free flow speed adjustment factor here, percentage of tractor trailers, percentage of single unit trucks, and of course your traffic demand. And you can set a demand adjustment factor as well as a capacity adjustment factor. Each row represents a 15-minute time period. However, you do enter the demand as an hourly value. Now I'm going to select the on-ramp edit segment feature. So again, we've got 2 rows for 2 time periods, and these values here are specific to the mainline portion of the on-ramp. And then we have a table here, again with 2 rows for 2 time periods, which are specific to the on-ramp, roadway, and the acceleration lane. Again, we can set the number of lanes here. We can set the free flow speed or use the estimation procedure, and set the free flow speed adjustment factor and capacity adjustment factor. Down here for the ramp roadway, we can change the length of the acceleration lane, or if it was the case of a off-ramp, which I'll show in a minute, the deceleration lane length. And we can set the number of lanes to 1 or 2, set the free flow speed for the ramp roadway, set the percentage of tractor trailers, single unit trucks, set the demand, again as an hourly value, and set the demand adjustment factor. We can also change the ramp from a right side to a left side. When we edit subsequent segments, we will not have a demand entry for the main line because we already entered a mainline demand here for the first segment. And again, we don't have a mainline demand here for the ramp segment, we just have an on-ramp demand. So the demand on the main line for each subsequent segment after the first one will be calculated as a function of the first segment mainline demand and then each subsequent on-ramp demand or off-ramp demand. So that's another basic segment there. Here's an off-ramp. Again, this input screen looks very similar to that for the on-ramp. We can change it from a right side to a left side, set the deceleration lane length, and so forth. Another basic segment, and then the weaving segment. Again, we've got entries for the mainline part of the weaving segment here. And again, we can set the free flow speed through this input mechanism. And then we have the inputs for the on-ramp roadway for the weaving segment. We have the inputs for the off-ramp roadway. And then we also need to enter any demand volume that's traveling straight from the on-ramp to the off-ramp. And make note of this note that the on-ramp and off-ramp demand volumes should not include the ramp-to-ramp volume. So for your demand here, it's only going to be what's going from the on-ramp to the main line. And for your demand here, it's only going to be what's going from the main line to the off-ramp. And again, any traffic that's going just from the on-ramp to the off-ramp, we would enter here. And then your weaving segment configuration properties are entered here. You can either specify a one-sided or a two-sided weaving segment. Note that the short length value will default to the length that was entered for the segment length on the main input screen, but that value can be revised as appropriate here. Another thing to point out about the inputs on these segment screens is that many of them have a fill down feature. So if you select a cell and then right click the mouse button, you'll get a fill down option. And when you click that, all the cells below that selected cell will change to the value of the selected cell. So if you're setting up a project that has a large number of time periods and you have a lot of repeat values for each time period, that can save you some time with data entry. There's also a quick data entry option mentioned at the beginning that's covered in another video. So some of the values that are entered on the individual segment input screens are summarized on this screen as well. Once you have all of your data entered for each segment and each time period, then you can move on to viewing the results. Again, you can change your time period here to view the summary of the inputs for different time periods. So to advance to the results, we can click on the tab here, Time Period Results. And so the calculations have now been run, and the results are displayed here. And again, we can change the time period with this input up here. And so now this will display the results for time period 2. And this column here shows the input segment type, and then the column next to it here to the right shows the analysis segment type. So there are some cases where the analysis segment type might be different from the input segment type. For more information about this, please consult the Highway Capacity Manual. But most of the time when that's going to occur is when you have a lane addition at an on-ramp segment or a lane drop at an off-ramp segment, or when your weaving segment length exceeds the calculated maximum length. So in that case, you can see which segment type then was ultimately used for the purposes of the calculations. A lot of different outputs are provided here, and in this video we're not going to go through those in detail. That's covered in the user guide and subsequent videos as well. One thing to point out is this column here on the far right, where if you want to get some additional outputs, so for example for a weaving segment, not all the intermediate calculation results are provided in this module, but you can load that into the separate segment module for a weaving segment. So we can click that button, and now it will load all the inputs for that weaving segment and for that specific time period. And then we can click the Calculate Performance Measures here. And now you can see some of the additional calculation results that you don't get in the Freeway Facility module. And these results should match what you see on the Freeway Facility output page. And so you can do that for each of these individual segments and for any given time period. The next tab here will provide the overall results. So these are the results across all of the time periods. And on this page you can get a matrix output of each of the segments by time period, and you can display a number of different output measures. In this case, everything looks good, colored in green, because the volume to capacity ratios were fairly low. However, you can change the threshold values to display different colors. And so you can change the threshold between the value you want to use for showing a green color versus a yellow color here, and likewise for yellow color versus a red color here. And you can copy the values to a clipboard. So if you want to import these values, say, into Excel to do more additional analysis or graphing of the values, you can just click that button, open up an Excel spreadsheet, and hit paste. And then finally, you can click on the Report tab, and you can get the formatted report just like you can for any of the other segment modules. And then you can just send that to the printer by pressing this button here or going to the File menu and selecting Print. Also under this File menu, you can go to File Information. You can enter the analyst's name or analysis date, the agency, notes. These values are not used in the analysis anyway. They're just for informational purposes, and they would show up here in the top part of this formatted report. There are some Freeway property values that do affect the analysis. These values here on the left, again, are not included in any of the calculations, but the values here on the right, the jam density, the bottleneck capacity reduction proportion, those in particular come into play in an oversaturated analysis. These other values right now cannot be changed in the software. So that concludes the overview of the Freeway Facility module.